This is Bumper to Bumper, the car show. Drive in anxious and cruise out confident. With the best automotive information for your vehicle. And now your hosts, Matt Allen and Dave Riccio.
Well, finally, I think winter is starting to settle in. Good morning. Welcome to Bumper Radio. I am Matt Allen. Along by my side here is Dave Riccio. And as always, Saturdays at 11, we are your KTAR car guys, helping you with your car. Whether you've got a problem, maybe your car's telling you something this morning, it's acting a little bit different because it's a little chilly outside. Maybe your car's got the flu. I don't know. Is there a flu shot, Dave?
There definitely is flu car.
There's a flu. Sometimes they're sick. Sometimes they're dying. But don't always have to let that happen. So, again, we're always here to help you out. And if you have a question about your car, you want to have us help you with your car, all you have to do is give us a call, and you do that by dialing 602-277-5827. It's 602-277-KTAR. If you'd like to text, you can do that at 411-923. So it's a little chillier this morning. I mean, I think this weather has been teasing us. And I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, Dave, we came in here and we're like, well, it's getting cold. We're going to talk about some things you might see with your car, right? And then what happened?
Got warm.
It's not cold yet. Well, then we had
a tease, winter tease.
A tease for sure. So, we talked about some of the things that are going to start happening to your car potentially when it gets cold. You might get the tire pressure light coming on. You probably had that. You park in the garage, or maybe you don't have a garage and you got your tire pressure set or they're a little low. Well, when the temperature drops 40 degrees, what happens? The tire pressure is going to go down. So you might have that tire pressure light on, check engine lights come on. We've talked about all these things, so we're going to start breaking them down a little bit, and we'll start with the transmission today. People are probably experiencing symptoms with their car, Dave, because of the cold weather. And what happens? It exposes potential problems or new symptoms that you don't have when it's warm out.
Yeah, definitely. Transmissions are very much affected by temperature, and people don't realize it. This time of year, we talk about morning sickness, transmission morning sickness. You get in your car, you start it up, you put it in gear, and nothing happens. You sit there and it warms up for a second, maybe you rev it up a little bit, then it starts moving. Well, that's a very common phone call that we get this time of year. And when you get that first cold snap, that's when that phone call really shows up. But even if it's cooling down, the car's starting to misbehave a little bit. And that can be for different reasons, but the most common reason is the transmission's a little bit low on fluid. So transmission fluid expands and contracts with temperature. So that's why if you've ever looked at a dipstick, they hardly put dipsticks in cars anymore. But when you did, there was a hot level, okay? Because you checked your transmission fluid when it was hot. So if it was cold and it was a little lower than that, you're like, okay, I'm okay. But now you don't even have that access.
But now you talked about temperature definitely affecting the transmission. And for sure in the summertime, that the high temperature, the heat, is the killer of the transmission, right? That's when you really, you can toast that thing.
That's when the damage is done sometimes. And then when you get around to wintertime, it doesn't really show up until wintertime. So a transmission is a hydraulic machine. So there's all kinds of seals and passages and compartments and gaskets and things in there. And so what happens is there's internal hydraulic leaks. So that isn't leaks that necessarily show up on the ground or in your driveway, but they're hydraulic leaks within the machine of the transmission. And so when
it's like internal bleeding. Maybe if you've probably heard that at the doctor's office or seen the whatever the show is, ER, or I don't on TV, you heard internal bleeding, but I guess that would be the closest way to relate.
Same thing, yeah. So there's nothing on the driveway, but it's not working right, and it's just a matter of it leaking internally. Mm-hmm. There's some amount of hydraulic leak that happens anyway, but it just becomes more because that molecule of transmission fluid is now smaller. So if there was a little hole there,
breaking down the science,
molecular.
We're
I don't know what the word means, but I can use it. I've heard it once or twice.
Right?
I watched Discovery Channel.
So now my transmission in my truck is a little funny. I have noticed some. I believe in the neighborhood the other day, I actually barked second gear a little bit. I had to get out in traffic, and it was cold, and that thing, scratched second gear. And I don't know if that's really a problem in the making. I might have to get it over for you guys to take a look at it. That might have just been a perfect storm of right throttle pressure, and the car's still a little bit cold, but who knows? So you said one of the things that maybe it whines a little bit, or the car. So one symptom of a problem that the cold is going to show you, put it in gear and it just simply doesn't move, or delayed engagement, we might have to call it 2 or 3 seconds. If that symptom then goes away when it's warm, is it making other damage into the transmission? Or, I mean, we know it doesn't fix itself, but I guess if it really shows cold, maybe when it's hot, you're only getting, I'm just going to make up a percentage. Maybe you're getting only 15% of the hydraulic leak, where when it's cold, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, you might get 70% leakage. That's why you really notice the symptom. But if just a little bit's bleeding by, you may never feel that, but it's in the background, it's working on causing a problem. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, what you don't want to do is if you run a transmission a little low on fluid, like a little low being a quart and a half, 2 quarts, somewhere in there, you can actually damage a transmission because it's not complete apply to the clutch, so it's slipping the clutch a little bit where you wouldn't normally have that. Sometimes you'll see a transmission like you'll be going down the road and the transmission cooler line erupts and all the fluid goes out of it. Generally doesn't damage a transmission because it happens so quickly that it just quit moving and there was no shearing, the clutches. And then, but that slow, just being a little bit low on fluid, you don't want to ignore it. Some people will ignore that situation.
It only does it when it's cold, so I don't need to worry about it because it's only cold for a couple minutes. Well,
don't take a small problem and make it huge because you ignored it. The other symptom that comes up when it's cold, you'll go around a corner. You turn a corner, and that fluid will slosh in the transmission pan over to one side. And then the transmission will take a gulp of air, and it'll neutral out for a second, and then it'll engage back into gear. That's another low fluid symptom. So there's a couple times, or even when you put the car in reverse and you back up a little bit, and then you throw it into drive to go forward. Well, what happens is, again, that fluid sloshes in the pan.
Or a steep driveway, maybe.
Oh yeah.
It's cold and it just can't pick up enough fluid.
And a little bit of noise. We talked about noise last week with the power steering fluid when it's low. When the power steering fluid is low, you get a little bit of cavitation because the pump's it's getting starved for fluid. Yeah. Same thing with the transmission pump. They almost sound the same way. Is that they're, when they're a little low, there's a little bit of buzzing coming out from the transmission.
And people say, and I've had the look from a customer at my shop before, and you've probably had it more than I have. We talked about checking the transmission fluid, and there's dipsticks to check the transmission fluid. And hell, I would argue that, and it's not because of incompetence or anything, those transmission dipsticks are hard to read sometimes.
Very hard to read.
You put them in 3 or 4 times, and they come out, and they're different. But now, I mean, you check a transmission fluid hot or cold is what we say, right? Before. Right. Now it's got to be like 177 degrees. And if you miss that window, you're screwed. You can't, we get them in the shop and can you check my transmission fluid? It's too warm. We got to put a swamp cooler in front of it. We got to do, and if it's a minor, if it's big time low, it doesn't, maybe you don't have to be an exact temperature to determine that it's low. But if you're talking about a small problem, you got to have that fluid level in that right window.
Well, transmissions are different. They don't burn fluid per se. Like your engine, you could burn some engine oil. So your engine consume it. It's going away. Transmissions don't do that. So if it's low on fluid, it's leaking somewhere. Or perhaps the person who serviced it last in the summertime, you might not see a leak in your driveway, but maybe you got an insufficient transmission service. It's a moving target, Matt, and I would argue that an inexperienced technician could, by accident, leave a transmission low. Well, you don't know there's a problem until you get to December, and all of a sudden, you're like, it's doing just what he's talking about. I go around corners and my car does weird things.
Right. Now, I think some people also avoid coming in. It's like maybe you don't want to go to the dentist. You're like, I'm going to have to deal with that crown or that, I'm just going to put it off. So I think most people think that if they go to a transmission shop and describe a transmission, they're going to get a transmission problem. They're going to leave with the transmission. It's like you go to the surgeon. Yeah, usually they get you into surgery.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't always need it. So if you had to make up some numbers, and you probably know them pretty close, how many times does somebody actually comes in and says, I have a transmission problem? How often is it really not the transmission? And when it is something with, that is a drivability problem related to the transmission, whether it's a transmission computer or the transmission, how many of those require an overhaul?
30%. It's pretty low. So the phone call always starts out like this. My transmission's slipping. How much for a transmission? Well, let's check it out. I just need the worst case. Let me know. Let me just accept it so I can move on and make my decisions. And we say, no, we're not going to give you a price because you probably don't need one. You got a 70% chance that you don't need a transmission. They bring it in, we run it through, we find electrical problem or we find a fluid level problem. Fluid level is a big deal. And we get people that are certain they need a transmission because it's low on fluid. I mean, that happens all the time. And the other one that cracks me up is the guy that's got the Dodge truck. He says, I checked the fluid this morning, and it was fine, and you're telling me it's low. I said, sir, did you read the dipstick? It says check in neutral. No, I didn't do that. That's a 2-quart window on the dipstick, so it was low on fluid.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't ignore it because you think it's going to be expensive, because it may not. But also, when you're picking your transmission shop, you need do a little bit of homework. Look at the Better Business Bureau website. There's lots of them out there, and there's lots of transmission shops that you're going to go to. And if you say you have a transmission problem, guess what? You're getting a transmission, period. And I bet in some shops, 9 out of 10 that present for a, quote, transmission issue get a transmission. In the contrary, you're a 3 out of 10. What other?
We had a. This is funny because people don't realize how complex these things are. But we had a Corvette in our shop, and this person was convinced they needed a transmission. Well, guess what? They had a bad battery. Mm-hmm. So the adaptations, the learned values in the computer for that transmission were getting the battery was weak. So when you go to start the car, the voltage would drop, below 9.5 volts. It'd lose that memory, and boom, the transmission doesn't work right. And it would happen every other day, and it was weird. And so they're ready to buy a transmission somewhere. We said, let's take a look at it. We took a look at it. The battery was the source of the problem. So when we're diagnosing transmission problem or any problem for that matter, the car has to have a good battery. So that's the first thing we do and test. And even if it's on the cusp, we say, you know what? It's not worth your time and effort to damage something on the car. Put a good battery in it. So we carry interstate batteries. And we have for years because everyone knows them. Everyone can check them.
Well, just like the name says, interstate batteries. What's the nation connected by interstate? So it's from coast to coast, the east to the west, north to the south. All you have to do, if you've got a interstate battery in your car and you're having a problem, interstatebatteries.com. They're going to take you, they're going to lead you to somebody that will take care of you. And of course, locally here, everybody seems to have them, as well as many of the shops you'll find on Bumper to Bumper Radio.